We're now ready to add the first of our two image views to the user interface. Now, if you take a look at the palette, underneath Form Widgets, you don't see anything named Image View, and that's because it's in a separate category. There's actually several different categories of components that we can use here in the Visual Layout Editor. We've been focusing so far on the one form widget that we used called a text view. For an image view, we go to the Images and Media category, where you can see one such component is the image view component. And remember, we're working with a relative layout in this example, so one of the things we need to do with each new component we add to the user interface is specify how it's going to appear on the user interface relative to other components. Now, in this latest version of the Visual Layout Editor, if I drag an image view over the text view, notice that we now have a rectangle around the text view with a bunch of sections in it. And if you hover the control that you're dragging on over one of those sections, it actually pops up a little tooltip, if you will, telling you how it's going to configure the element that you're about to drop. So if I were to do this, it's basically saying that this new image view will be set up below the welcome text view. Or if I wanted to, I can drag it all the way around. Whoops. And as I go to each of these new sections, it highlights the corresponding section and tells me how it's going to configure the element based on that. Now that's one way that we can add this image view onto the user interface. I'm still dragging at the moment. Another way is to drag it onto the outline and drag it on top of the layout that you want to add it to and let go, in which case it places the image view into the layout, but the order in which those items appear here is not necessarily how they're going to appear on the screen. You can see that this is now appearing in the upper left corner of the user interface, but we really want it to appear down here, and we want it to use a different image as well. Now, of course, we could have just dragged it over the text view and positioned it in the center below the text view, but I wanted to show you editing the positioning inside of the properties window as well. So what we would like to do with this new image view, first of all, is change its ID, and I'm going to change it from image view 1 to droid image view. If I can type here, there we go. And so now I've got my droid image view, and we would like to set its layout positioning. Now, the layout positioning is not going to be in the image view subcategory of the properties window. Rather, it will be in the MISC category, and you can see for the layout options that there's things like layout above and layout below, among others. We want to lay this out below a different component, so I'm going to click on the layout below's field for the value, and notice I get an ellipse, and when I pop open that ellipse, I get my reference chooser dialog, and I have things that I could position it relative to. Now, I'm not going to position it relative to another layout, and I'm not going to position it relative to a string, and there are no other images on the screen, so I'm not going to position it relative to a drawable. What I'm going to position it relative to is another component in the layout, and specifically the text view. Now once I select that and click OK, you can see that it's saying to lay this out below the welcome text view, and if I see on the screen, it's now below that text view. It's not positioned the way I want, but it's in the right location now for the purpose of this example. Now the next thing I want to do is to specify the value of that image view in terms of what it's going to display as an image on the screen. And for that property, we go to the source value of the image view itself. Right now it's set as a drawable called icon. And if I go back over here to my drawable folders in my res folder, you'll see that there's one called icon.png. The name of the resource for a given file is the file name without the extension by default. So the drawable called icon is currently being displayed. Now if I change that I can do that either just by typing directly in here or by selecting using the ellipsis button. So let's go to our drawable, and you can see that I have one called Android and one called Bug that represent Android.png and Bug.png respectively. So let's go ahead and select Android and click OK, and now we have our larger Android logo being displayed on the screen. Now we also want this icon to be centered on the screen, so I'm going to go back to the layout capabilities down here, and let me stretch this a little bit so you can see that we have a layout center horizontal attribute, and if I click that attribute I can change its value to true, and when I hit enter, now the image is centered on the screen. And so now our layout contains the text view followed by the image view, centered both on the screen. And if I stop there and give this a run, let's pull up our AVD here. In a moment it'll shut down the current running version, install the new version, and we should now see the execution of the new version of the app with both our text view and our Android icon on the screen. So far so good. Everything is appearing as we expect it to. And then finally we wanted to repeat this step that we just showed you for a second image view. So if I go ahead and select the image view and I drag it over the Android object, I could say just by dragging it down here that I want it to appear below the current Android icon. Notice in this case that it centers it automatically on the screen, whereas if I delete that and then do it the way I did originally, in this case the image is currently in the upper left corner, and then I would have to go through like I did before, go down to the layout properties and tell it to lay out below a particular item. In this case I want it to show up below the Droid image view. So now it's down below it, but it's still not centered. In this case I could say layout center horizontal should be true, and when I hit enter it's now centered. Of course it's not displaying the image I want, so for that I can go back to my source property and select a different drawable, in this case the bug image. Now I have my bug image, and at this point we have the graphical user interface set up the way we want for this welcome app. And of course if we finally go ahead and run this app, we can see in our AVD what that's going to look like in its final form. Just wait a moment for it to come up on the screen here, and now that it's installed the app, we see the welcome title bar string, and we see the text and our two images being displayed on the screen. So what we've seen now is a little bit of how to use the visual layout editor. We showed you how to create a string resource that could contain text that might get localized in the future. We showed you how to drag and drop components onto the user interface, and also how to drag and drop components onto the outline view. In this case I should have also renamed my image view, so let's just go ahead and do that while I see it on the screen here. So this is my bug image view. So now we have our components named, and we showed you how to edit properties in the properties window. We also talked about the fact that when you create an ID with the plus sign, that's indicating that it's actually creating that variable name, which can then be used not only to reference that component from other components in the XML description of the GUI, but also to give you access to that object programmatically, as you'll see in later examples and lessons. Now in the next video we're going to take a look at the final XML that was generated.